Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this. It's the third session. It's the second day of LK launch. And today we're sharing and appreciating First Nations, Metis, and Inuit perspectives. And we're going to take a look at two terms in particular, appropriation and appreciation. And let me introduce our speakers today, the folks that have set aside their time back in June and throughout the summer to prepare. And yesterday, doing a presentation that kind of would act as a good prelude to this one, but this I think will stand along on its own as well. First, we've got Gretchen Sands Gamble, second year. She's sort of the Indigenous lead, sort of doing projects related to that from Saskatchewan territory. Did I get that close to right today? It's also known as Walpole Island First Nation, and she's spent the summer sewing, stitching, swimming with her two children. Welcome back, Gretchen. We're glad to have you here. And also with us is Pam. Pam, you're fresh off of a volleyball. How did the banquet go last night?
It was just a gathering at the beach, and just our team that we played with. So it was lovely on the sand, had a swim, good barbecue. Great.
Awesome. Nothing wrong with that. So you've been teaching for 30 years from Prince Edward Island. I guess you had a trip out east too. Well, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us again this morning. And today you are joined by Laura Van Bunderen. She's grade 1 teacher at Lansdowne Public School in Sarnia, entering her 5th year at that school. And you're fresh off a trip down east as well. You were in Newfoundland?
Yeah, we were.
Outstanding. I put a little bit of nature sound in the background. I hope it's coming through that people can hear that. But looking forward to hopefully getting back and doing more of the relaxing and enjoying some of the last 2 weeks that we have. But what I'm going to do right now, thanks for joining us, Laura, and I'm going to turn things over to our presenters. I'll be on the back channel. If you have comments or questions or anything you'd like to contribute, use the chat tool to do that. And if you can find a way to raise your hand, it's under that participants menu. You can do that as well if you'd like to speak with your voice. But I'm going to turn the sharing of my screen off so that the presenters can take over. And I'm going to turn off my camera, but you can trust that I'll be here in the background.
Okay. Maybe yet? Not yet. Always a few steps.
There you go.
Awesome. So yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And hopefully you're comfy and have some creature comforts with you, some water, coffee, or things in the cup you don't need to tell us about. But today we're just going to have a conversation, and please join in if you have questions to go along with that. Rod is going to help us along. If you have questions, you will voice it for us if it comes to the chat. So please do that. An hour to wake up, okay? I get my coffee. Just kind of a reflection to explain what cultural appropriation is. Yeah. Laura's going to bring her perspective from the classroom. So I'm kind of acting as the interviewer today. I think that's the way things are going to work. So welcome. I'm going to lead on with Gretchen.
Okay, so before we get started, I just introduce myself in my language. Gamble Indigenous Hello, my name is Gretchen Gamble. I am from Walpole First Nation, also known as Saskatchewan territory. I am a Chinook clan, and I am an Anishinaabe. And so my role with our school board is the elementary Indigenous education special projects teacher. Any difficulty here? Okay. Let me see. Does this sound a little bit better if I hold it right here? Can you guys hear me okay?
That does sound a little bit better. Thanks, Gretchen.
Can you hear me okay?
I can barely.
Barely?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you move your microphone and mute mine, that might help too.
Okay.
So a little bit better. We're going to mute a couple of the microphones. That's okay? Okay. All right. So I am the elementary Indigenous education special projects teacher for our board. So I help teachers implement Indigenous education in their classrooms. And yesterday, Somebody else has a
You can speak into the mic.
Somebody else has a microphone on.
You're sounding okay to me, Gretchen.
Unless you have something you want to share. Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, alrighty. Okay, so yesterday, and we talked about reflection on the year, and we based our presentations really on questions that are coming from teachers and issues that are arising and things that they would like to learn more about. And so cultural appropriation is something that comes up a lot. And so, as always, I always say that we need to find comfort in discomfort, in knowing that what we are going to be learning and what we are going to be teaching our students might not always be the most comfortable topic to teach. And there will be different feelings that arise in ourselves because we are pushing ourselves and we are challenging each other to learn and to move forward in our learning. So there will be some discomfort, and we just need to lean into that discomfort and to know that we are moving forward.
And I think we might see some things today that we go, ooh, I had that in my classroom. I definitely will see some images that I can reflect back on and say, yes, I probably did something like this in my classroom. But this is our opportunity to do better as we move forward.
Yeah.
And it's okay with that. And Gretchen and I talked too about someone may speak to us about, we're doing something that's not respecting the culture. And rather than stop and say, well, I'm not going to do anything, like, so what's our next step? What can we do to become better with this and learn? And it's just basically an opportunity to learn.
Yeah. And I think to show our students too and each other that we are still learning.
So we're going to start our conversation off today, just so we have an understanding. What is cultural appropriation? And we'll then get into some examples that we may see in our classrooms.
Okay. Cultural appropriation, it's sometimes kind of tricky, but the main idea is it's taking intellectual property, traditional knowledge, cultural expressions or artifacts from someone else's culture without permission. And these could include aspects such as dance and dress, music, language, folklore and stories, traditional medicine, religious symbols and teachings. And we have to remember that it's most likely to be harmful when the community or the culture that it comes from is a minority group that has been oppressed and exploited historically.
And so today we're focusing on our Indigenous peoples from our country. Then we talk about cultural appropriation, but we can expand this to all cultures when we think reflectively.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks, Gretchen. So in our classrooms, we think about the things we have visible in our classroom, or the stories we're sharing in our classroom, or videos we're sharing in our classroom, resources we bring. So we may actually have some things there that might be culturally appropriating an image, a story, a way of thinking from our Indigenous partners.
Yeah.
So one way might be books.
Yeah. And if we think about some of the books that we have traditionally used in our classroom, we do need to start to take a step back and to reflect and to look at things through a different lens, right? Through a more critical lens. So here are, some favorites. Clifford, like these books here in The Indian in the Cupboard, they share an idea that, or they perpetuate stereotypes and share an idea that all Indigenous cultures are the same. And there's outdated language, and we just really need to reflect on the resources that we are using in our classroom.
I'm glad you brought up the word language, because yesterday in our conversation we talked a lot about the word Indian, and just talking about how if we look through our resources, just the vocabulary that's being used within the book itself also will help us determine whether this is a book that's appropriate for the time we have now. So we're looking to move beyond the language of the past. So in visual arts, we often bring feel like we can bring a culture, share that with our students through activities through the arts. So we have visuals here about visual arts, but be thinking about drama and dance and music as well. And we found lots of images on Pinterest, which, I love my Pinterest.
but and a lot of the images that we use that are sharing stereotypes or cultural appropriation are from Pinterest. So we really need to be careful where we're finding our resources too. And thinking about visual arts and some of the images that you see here, we need to remember that Indigenous styles of art are based on images and ideas and stories that are extremely old and sacred and specific to certain groups of people. They weren't created for the sake of creating art, but they were there to share stories and to share culture within their group, right? And so these images aren't to be copied. They are to be responded in response to, and
So as we move forward in our presentation today, we'll be thinking about, well, we don't want to eliminate the opportunity to explore the culture from our Indigenous, First Nation people, Metis people, and Inuit people, but just like how we go about bringing that into our classroom. And our curriculum will really be a guide for that as well.
So again, images found on Pinterest. So if we're thinking about how we want to decorate our classroom, and if we, this is, if you look up First Nation or a Native American theme on Pinterest, this is the kind of things that you find in people's classrooms. So,
And we do want to create that inviting environment in our classroom, and so have a spot for reading, but just thinking about the elements we're used to create that.
Yeah. And so the image of a teepee, again, that is a typical image that people associate to all First Nations people or all Indigenous people of North America, when not every nation used teepees. And I've heard the term pan-Indian, meaning it just is everybody, right? All Indigenous people, when really that's not true. Not all Indigenous people use teepees. So again, it's reducing all the cultures down to a simple stereotype there.
So when looking at these images, I feel a little uncomfortable at times because, I'm saying, like, oh, I might have done something like this, using the phrase, my tribe, like, come on over. So the language we use, not only in maybe culturally appropriating something, but maybe an image too as well. So a little discomfort. So thank you for helping me find the comfort along with this today. So celebrations, there's lots of things we celebrate through the school year. Thinking back to like Chinese New Year, Diwali, we think about our Christmas celebrations, that sort of thing. So, we want to make sure we're still celebrating and having fun in our schools, but just how do we make sure we're being reflective and saying, like, is this something that is appropriate? And are we being mindful of the heritage and culture behind it all?
And I think when we start to look at things in a different way and to shift our thinking, right, we're starting to be able to see more things maybe that we've been doing that have been maybe inappropriate or have been hurtful. And it's just something that some people just haven't really had to consider before, right? Because there are voices now that are moved to the center more, and so we're more in the mainstream, and so people are hearing those voices more. And we're starting to realize in the school or even in mainstream culture, oh, maybe this isn't something that is okay.
And I think the thing to focus on today is about the learning we're doing about this, because this might have not even been in our understanding.
Yeah.
And our actions may have been disrespectful to others, and we would blind to that. So how do we open up our own eyes and our own hearts to figure out more about a culture and what's appropriate to share and whose voice we don't want to say don't share it. It's a matter of who's sharing it and why it's being shared.
And I think if we remember too that for the past 150 years in our country, Indigenous people have not had control over their image in the media or how they are represented. And even if you think about in schools, when students have been learning about Indigenous people of this country, the voices that were being shared were not even Indigenous voices, right? Like the books and the resources were not written by Indigenous people. And so luckily now Indigenous voices are moving to the center more, and we are able to find things to use to help us to navigate that.
That is so true, Gretchen, about when we think about, well, how do we move away from cultural appropriation to things like going to the source and finding the creators of these materials and inviting different perspectives into our classroom. So as we move forward now, so we gave you a brief sample of how we might be appropriating cultural pieces from our not only our Indigenous people, but other cultures as well. So how can we avoid this cultural appropriation and actually turn it to be promoting and appreciating the culture? So we're going to be bringing in Laura into the conversation, and she is one of many teachers at Lansdowne that took part in a journey this year about to learn how to engage students through cultural activities and learning there as well. So thanks, Laura, for joining our conversation.
I think you need to unmute your mic.
Try again, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
So before we begin, we thought we might draw on a piece of information called critical literacy skills, because this is something that teachers have shared with us about building their own capacity to look at things critically and help them determine whether the information they're sharing is appropriate, so it's not culturally appropriate information. So if we think about that big theme of all texts, everything that's been created, so narrative text, artwork, newspapers, stories being shared, they are all constructions. And so when we have that construction, they always include beliefs and value messages. And there's always an interaction between the person receiving the information and the people that are giving the information. So there's that question about, what does that text make us think, and what does the author make us want to think, or the piece of art or the dance that we're seeing. And then there's always some kind of benefit from this piece of text. So like, what do they want us to think? Is there a financial piece to this? Do they want to sway us, persuade us somewhere? So when we're looking at what's happening in our classroom, we may wish to be pulling upon these critical literacy skills as educators to determine what we're sharing with our students. Is it appropriate? Or are we culturally taking something that we may need to have a partner with before we share it?
Mm-hmm.
And those skills really can be fostered through our literacy program as well with our students. But Gretchen and I have done some learning with teachers this year, and we started off thinking about we want our students to be more critically literate and judging and looking at things reflectively and asking whose voices are here. But we also realize as educators, we need to be asking ourselves this question. So if you're thinking about the resources you're using in your classroom, these might be questions that you pose as you think about what you're pulling to the table. So who created this text or resource? What did they want us to think? Whose voice is included? Whose voice or perspective is missing? And who controls the message? So asking yourself these questions may help you on clearing that path into understanding more towards the cultural appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
So we got some things that you may wish to be looking in your classroom. How about that?
So looking at the books and thinking about when we are talking about Indigenous people and when we are talking about the history of Indigenous people and the relationship with Canada, we need to make sure that we are choosing to share Indigenous voices. And there are so many really great resources out there to share. We use the website goodminds.com. It is an Indigenous owned company. They vet the books. They make sure that they are appropriate. And yeah, it's just really important to share that voice, especially when talking about Indigenous people.
So these are some of the books that lots of people are sharing. And Laura, you have experience with some of these books.
I think it did.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I had it backwards. So, get the buttons and mute. So these are books that Laura may have used in her classroom this year, and maybe other ones that you want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lansdowne has a really quite a large Indigenous population, with a lot of students coming from the Aamjiwnaam First Nation, as well as many Ojibwe students who live right in Sarnia. And we have a Ojibwe language teacher at Lansdowne, Sonia George. So back in the fall, we kind of started our journey with by participating in the Global Read Aloud. And all the books last year, all the picture books for the Global Read Aloud were written by Indigenous authors with illustrations by Indigenous artists. And that was a really great spot for us, great place for us to start. So these books were made available to everybody across the school, with an opportunity for them to read it with their students. And then everybody, all the teachers engaged with that book, how they felt appropriate for their age group. So it might have been a writing activity with some of our older students, an art activity, maybe a simple conversation with some of the younger ones to get them thinking.
So like you were sharing yesterday about how strong there were some books brought a really strong curriculum connection to it. And one of the images we have there is how your school was sharing that across the whole school. And so some saw really strong curriculum connections, and others, it basically became a conversation. And
Yeah, absolutely.
learning. And Gretchen used picture of you in the classroom showing that historical perspective. So we have the wampum that belt there. But you found that throughout the year, it wasn't just about social studies and history and geography.
And it's important to find the curriculum connections in all areas to show that literature written by Indigenous people is important and has value, and to reach out to the science curriculum too, and to show students that yes, Indigenous knowledge and history goes across the curriculum, not just in the history part of social studies, because we're still here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's many stories you're probably already enjoying your classroom. It's just the addition of a story from a First Nation author, or maybe artwork from a Metis artist. We were talking yesterday about the Inuit inclusion. Like that's something that we're learning more and more about as well. So just the inclusion is that cultural appreciation to begin with, and there's so many beautiful stories being shared in our classrooms. We talked earlier about teepee and in the decoration, but this is not a decoration. This is an experiential learning piece that will help foster that cultural appreciation. And I think those are Laura's little kitties sitting in there.
They are, yeah. We this was at Lansdowne in the spring. We had kind of built up some relationships with our First Nations partners, and we were able to borrow this teepee from Aamjiwnaam First Nation. So it was a really wonderful opportunity for the students to see what a real teepee looked like, to experience being inside it. Lots of my students were noticing the smells when they were inside. They could see the differing color of the fabric as it went up and out the teepee. So it was a really powerful experience for them. We went out and had a story in there, and it just really kind of takes that learning to the next level.
And I think it's important to point out that throughout the year, teachers at Lansdowne worked really hard to foster relationships with people from Aamjiwnaam First Nation through the Ojibwe teacher, but also through the families in their school, as well as they reached out to the Native Friendship Center here in Sarnia. So they worked very hard to foster those relationships and nourish them throughout the year.
So we spoke earlier about visual arts and all of the arts here. And so again, that inclusion of the having Indigenous artists work brought to students' attention to discuss and reflect upon. And if we think about our art curriculum, there's a lot of it is goes beyond the creating of art, and so it's about the reflecting on that. And this is a little couple of snapshots of what some learning some of our teachers did this year, where Gretchen brought to them the attention of this Métis artist.
And Anishinaabe artist Isaac Murdoch. And so we brought these in and we talked about the images on them, that we were not going to copy those images. They are sacred images to the people of this area. But we were going to create our own responses to the artwork and to the issues that were raised through their art.
So those images, if you can look closely at the prints that Belcourt made, there's lots of, as you said, connections to culture and teachings that go along with that. And the conversations that came up from that were really valuable. It's about the creation that people then have in response to it. So again, this is an example of some art that was made at your school, Laura, and you know, we look closely at, there's many layers to this piece of art, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about the journey on this piece of art.
Yeah, so we, after the Global Read Aloud was so successful for us in the fall, we decided to kind of keep it going with a book a month for the remainder of the school year. So we chose to use the Jingle Dancer in the spring, as that was kind of getting into powwow season, which was a current thing happening for a lot of our students in their lives. So with Sonia George, our Ojibwe teacher, her and the Ojibwe students created this beautiful display in our school, and they invited the rest of the school population to be a part of it. So on the board there, you're seeing little jingles that were created, and every student in the whole school made a jingle, and they wrote a hope for themselves on the jingle, and then this piece was put together.
And I just wanted to point out too that this piece was created in consultation with Sonia. So there was teaching around the jingle dress and the jingles and what they mean. So again, it was done very carefully and in a culturally appreciative manner. But I think that this is a really cool, a really nice showing of that work and the relationship that this school has built with Sonia as well.
And you think about the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation is to help build mutual understanding, intercultural understanding, mutual respect, and empathy. So the fact that this is a many-layered activity and school-wide focus, we're really bringing that appreciation to the culture that goes along with just our general learning in our classrooms.
Absolutely. And for using these books, the book for a non-Indigenous teacher, the book really became our teaching tool, just like how a Rec and Rec or a 10 frame would be that tool in your math classroom. The book really helped support and helped with that comfort versus discomfort piece.
Yeah. So again, our resources created by Indigenous people to help lead the learning.
So making connections with First Nation individuals, and we often reflect on saying First Nation people, because in our area that is who the people we could connect with through our nations. We have 4 nations that students come from and attend our school system, and so there's lots of joy in these pictures. I love looking at them.
Yeah, so in my role in the board, I have helped teachers in many schools to make connections with people from the local First Nations in our area. And I know that that's not always possible for some people or for some schools, but there are ways, reach out online. There's ways to do that. So people in our board can reach out to me and I can help them to make the connections. And it's so important to foster those relationships and to nourish them and to keep them going, because it's not only good for the students, but I've always said, it's really healing for people to come in and who may have had a very negative experience in school, either through residential school or through the day school, or just the negative experiences for Indigenous people in school, to come in and have these really great positive experiences. So I get messages from the people who come in and say, that was so great. Thank you so much for inviting me to come in. So yeah, we need to foster those relationships, and they will help to lead the learning in a very appropriate way as well.
So Laura, I know you made some very close, warm relationships
Mhm.
with some people from the Anishinaabe community and in the Kedgenon as well. And so maybe you can tell us a little story of what's happened here. It looks like a school assembly is happening.
Yeah. So like many schools, we have monthly assemblies at the end of each month where we honor students. So in this picture here, you're seeing Sonia George, our Ojibwe teacher, and alongside her is Rita Sands. Rita became kind of a fixture in our assemblies later in the year last year, and she was sharing a story with the students, and that Rita always tried to connect her story to the Indigenous book that we'd focused on that month and to the teaching we'd been learning about. Became a really powerful thing for our students, and they really looked forward to seeing Rita every month. There was a couple of times that Rita wasn't able to join us in person just because of other commitments. So we were fortunate enough to have a recording of Rita that we were able to share, and the students just really looked forward to that message from her.
And I'd like to point out too that the teachers and everybody at Lansdowne were really flexible. And when you're inviting somebody into your classroom, or if you're going out to a community, things might not always go as planned. And I know that as teachers, we really like to have things planned and set out just so, but we sometimes need to let go of that and to understand that there are different ways of learning, and there are different places that knowledge can come from, and we just have to be comfortable in that discomfort of letting go sometimes of the control.
I want you to say that again about there are other ways of knowing.
There are other ways of knowing and other ways of learning, and the knowledge doesn't always come from
A book
or from us as the teacher. We have to be able to give away that control.
And going back to Laura's sharing about sometimes they didn't have the face-to-face, the real person in the room. So using video, connecting that way, connecting remotely is a great way to bring a visitor into the schools to have that conversation there. And there's some kiddos up on the stage up there. So they look like they're kind of, as in all schools, there's probably a concert going on, or doing something, or being acknowledged.
Yeah, so those students were the students that were being acknowledged that month for demonstrating the character trait. And because we have Sonia and the direction of her with her knowledge, we were able to acknowledge the students based on the 7 grandfather teachings. So those students up there were being acknowledged that month.
Yes. And we need to put like as a board, our message about the 7 grandfather teachings. The 7 grandfather teachings are sacred teachings that take a long time to learn and are often taught in certain ways. And without the relationships that they build at Lansdowne, and without Sonia's direction or the direction from the Native Friendship Center and the families, they wouldn't be able to do it justice. So it's something that our message as a board from our Indigenous team, we are saying, we need to just stay away from that in our schools. That is some culture that as teachers, we are not equipped to teach in the classroom.
So thanks for clarifying that, Gretchen, because again, it's that line. We have good intentions often, but then with the knowledge that we gather, we realize that maybe we are not doing the right thing. This was a really beautiful thing to witness as the school year developed last year about making the local connections, and so meeting people from the Kedgenon, Delaware Nation, you're going to say it from Lenape, and the Kettle and Stony Point, coming to our classrooms, but also going out into the communities.
And so we have been very lucky this past year to have lots of community members who want to help. People are seeing the value in sharing this learning for everybody, not just at schools where there are a high population of Indigenous students. We have to remember that this learning is for all students because Indigenous history is Canadian history. So we've been able to have drummers come to the school to talk about drumming and singing. We've been able to have some shaker making nights. We've been able to have people come talk about traditional hunting and trapping and what that means to them. That's actually my dad there in the bottom right corner. And we've had many students go out to Bakajunon for learning. We've had some out to Lenape-Lakwit, Delaware Nation, and also up to Amjinong as well. So we are able to make those connections. One thing that we need to remember too is we need to make sure that the relationships are reciprocal, so that we're not, as teachers and as schools, we're not just taking, right? We need to make sure that we're also giving back to, and make sure that the presenters who come into the schools and help us out are acknowledged, compensated for their time and for their knowledge, because it's not just the time that they're there. Maybe they're just there for half an hour, but there has been a lifetime of learning, right, to share what they need to share. And if there's questions about that, I'm the person who can help you with that.
And, you know, we all know that Gretchen's been a great help for our Lambton Kent teachers about making those connections. But at Lansdowne, you've been able to foster the relationships within the community, just through classroom teachers, making the first call and building that relationship back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Our parent community has been really supportive, and we've been able to foster and maintain some really positive relationships.
And that comes through trust and commitment and openness and inclusion. And so, you know, when we think about cultural appreciation, just the fact that we're starting to include Indigenous perspectives in our schools. That's a great way to make sure that we're having a really good path to move forward. So then this is again another picture of a celebration, and I know at schools we often have many events that go on throughout the year, but just listening to you and other teachers at Lansdowne, you moved away from like event type focus to a way of being at your school. So can you tell us a little bit what's happening here in this picture?
Yeah, we really wanted this year at Lansdowne for Indigenous perspectives to be seen all the time, and for those students to feel represented and valued every day. So what you're seeing in this picture here is another one of our monthly assemblies, and those students up at the front there are being acknowledged again for their trait. And what they're holding were our canoes of contribution. So at the beginning of the year, when we acknowledged Orange Shirt Day, our Ojibwe teacher had everyone in the entire school, staff, students, create a hand. And those hands went together to create these canoes of contribution. So at every assembly, they came out, and those students that were being acknowledged raised those canoes.
It's good because it honors all of the students too, and it also will help them to reflect back on Orange Shirt Day. You know, remember that they did that. So it's something that gets acknowledged on Orange Shirt Day, but throughout the whole year.
And here's some beautiful pictures of something happening at Lansdowne, where at the end of the year you had this authentic celebration, and your community partners joined you. And I know you have some great stories about the kids that are in the picture.
Yeah, this really was a beautiful thing that happened at Lansdowne in June, and it was a really wonderful way for us to showcase all of our learning and growth over the course of the year, and a really wonderful way for to kind of for the students to show off their culture and to be proud. We had lots of students who wore their regalia and danced for everyone, and they were confident and comfortable to do that by the end of the year because of everything that we had done and shared. We had a lot of parents who came to our event. You can see there's a couple parents who joined the boys on the drum. It was just a really wonderful celebration of everything we'd done over the course of the year, and a really wonderful way to acknowledge our Indigenous culture at Lansdowne.
And I think it's important to point out that it not only shows and shares with the Indigenous students there that their culture has value in the school and the history has value in the school, but it also shows the non-Indigenous students and their families too. Like, there is room for Indigenous culture and history and knowledge to be shared at the school, and we value it. I think that's important to remember that.
We talked earlier too about that many of the things that you did really connected with the curriculum and learned here, but well-being and identity and confidence, all those things we value so much in education, but we don't put a mark on them, right? Because we just want to help students build their empathy and be respectful about cultures and communities and themselves. Like all these steps you're taking are doing a great job with that. But that, and we're talking Lansdowne story right here in these images, but we all know that at other schools, they may not have students that in large numbers that are from a First Nation community, but really we know that this is something that all Canadians need to be taking part of. So how might we go about and do that? Is through visiting a First Nation community or inviting them in powwows. So Jim, we've learned a lot about that this year too, haven't we?
So some schools got to go to the Lambton College powwow, and it was a nice opportunity for the students there to it's a nice opportunity for students to take part in that part of the culture and to learn about it. And I just want to point out too that a lot of the classrooms that went there, they did a lot of learning before. So it wasn't just an event where they just go for the day and then that was it, right? There was a lot of learning that took place before they went. They learned about the regalia, they learned about what the powwow meant and everything.
And so we've talked about, something happening at a school level, going out and visiting, or maybe bringing something to your school. But the power of the internet has been really helpful in all this journey again. But when we find things on the internet, we have to go back to like who created this, what was the purpose for its being created, whose voice is being shared, whose voice is being ignored. So, but there's lots of great resources on that. And if we follow our LK Elementary blog, there's a section there for Indigenous education, and there's lots of resources there to pull on, and we'll put that in our resources as we share along.
Can I just interrupt for a second, Pam?
So we can think about the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation. When you're making call to actions, 63, when they're in education, is we think about what we're choosing to do in their students, in their classrooms, and the whole school community. If we can come back and think, is it making a difference on learning about intercultural understanding? Have students have the opportunity to see something from a different perspective, so they have that opportunity to build respect. There's empathy going on there. I think we're making some great gains.
Yeah, and I think we need to remember that through forming relationships with people from First Nations communities or from Indigenous communities, that helps to build the empathy, because there's a connection there, right? And through that connection, through visiting communities or through hearing the stories, either from books or through videos, we are helping our students and teachers too to build that empathy. And that is so important, because that's really what is going to lead to reconciliation, is that empathy building and the respect.
This is Rod here. I don't know. I hope you can hear me. I just want to interrupt for just a second. Hey, you're doing wonderfully. I just a couple of things. One, we're sort of close on time, so we're getting near the end, I know, but there's a question that is in the pool that I think is very relevant to what Gretchen and you were just sharing about. It's a question about, what do you do when you don't have a lot of Indigenous students or families in your community? How do you get to that level of appreciation when that background is absent? And I think that echoes a lot of my personal experience of, growing up in schools where we didn't have that rich cultural Indigenous population in the community to draw upon or to reflect upon. So we know we have you as a good starting point. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I really suggest to go online. Before I had this job, when I was in a kindergarten class, I would reach out to people on Twitter, and I would ask questions to people on Twitter about various things. But there's a strong Native or Indigenous representation on Twitter. So there are people who you can ask there. There's so many good resources on goodminds.com created by Indigenous people to share in the classroom, that share stories of the history and also contemporary stories and issues and contributions. Trying to find the resources, it's getting easier. There's a lot of stuff online. I know that our ETFO website has some really good resources, book lists on there. I really encourage people to look at the resources that they are using and to ensure that they are sharing the voices of Indigenous people through the resources that they choose.
Okay, thanks very much. You want to carry on, head to the finish line?
Yeah. Okay, so again, we're just going to take it back to this because we need to know that this is often an uncomfortable conversation, and sometime you might be confronted by a person who says, you know what you're doing is inappropriate, or what you're doing is disrespectful to my culture or to my people. And we need to take that as a learning opportunity. We need to know that there's so many different entry points in this learning that it's okay to not know, and we need to do better. And to do better, you know, we're starting to know better, so we know that we need to do better. And so we need to take that maybe comment from somebody as them being caring, to know that they want us to do better as well, and to say, okay, well, you know, it might hurt a little bit when we hear that, but we know that it will help us to move forward as a person and as an educator.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll even share it happened today. I have an issue with small words at times. My words our and the need to be used in a different way. So I was speaking today using our Indigenous people when I should be saying the Indigenous people. Because I'm really, if I use that term our, it's that colonial settler type of attitude. So Gretchen wrote me a little note. And we giggle about it because we have the relationship that we can like help each other learn and move forward. So in small words like that, there's a lot of power in that. So thank you, Gretchen, for helping me out with that. And I did feel uncomfortable. I did it. But I'm going to find comfort in knowing that I can move forward and catch myself with that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And I really appreciate people saying that, you know, with Laura's connection with the school, that they've fostered that community connection. You know, that's a beautiful thing there, but it's not the reality in all of our schools. So thank you very much for bringing that point. And as Gretchen says, the internet is a great friend, but use your critical literacy skills.
And so we're going to be sharing the blog post, the Indigenous blog. There's also a blog post, but it's a Google Doc still about the learning at Lansdowne, and it has a great table to share all the books that they used and some prompts that they used as the whole school. So that will be shared in the Dropbox. So yeah, miigwech for joining us, everybody. Yes. Later.
I was going to say that'd be the right word, miigwech. I think you did a wonderful job of sort of, I know Indigenous history and culture is very much built about sharing story. And so by including a storyteller to tell of her experiences in class, thanks Laura for joining us, it really sort of made rich and real the whole lesson that you had to share with us. And thank you for making us a little bit uncomfortable about some of the things that we're seeing, not only in our schools, but in our homes and in the wider culture that we live in every day. I know we have to move on, but I want to thank everyone for attending and for participating. And we'll follow up actually with some links to where you can follow up and see the recording of this if you want to share it with other folks or to look at related resources. At that, I'm going to hit pause on the recording, but thanks again, everybody.
Okay. Thanks. Miigwech.